Hey, I'm Alistair from DivX. I'm here with the Stage6 team in Los Angeles. We're at the studio of international artist BT.
Nice to see you, man.
Nice to see you again.
Cool, dude.
So just to give our audience a brief introduction to what you do, which is kind of hard to do because your career is so diverse.
That's true. It's confusing.
You're best known internationally for your trance and dance music.
Mm-hmm.
You've released 5 studio albums.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
You've done remixes for the likes of Sarah McLachlan, Madonna, Seal, Paul Van Dyke. You've had collaborations with Sasha, Tori Amos, David Bowie, and you've worked with vocalists like Jan Johnson and Kirsty Hawkshaw. But you've also scored for many movies, so the likes of Go, Fast and Furious, Monster, Stealth, an upcoming Jennifer Garner movie.
Yeah. Confusing. He's right.
And you've also created and produced TV shows. The Tommy Lee Goes to College for NBC.
Yeah.
And most surprisingly of all, perhaps, you've got a background in classical music.
Yeah.
So you went to Washington Conservatory of Music?
That's right, yeah. I went to the Washington Conservatory when I was a kid. Just to sort of speak to the question of what it is that I do, I hope that the way that, my body of work is remembered is as somebody that was an experimentalist. I'd much prefer to, I've said this many times, I'd much prefer to have a career where, every 3 moves I fall on my face a bit, mm-hmm. but continue to evolve, if that makes sense, mm-hmm. A lot of my peer group from the electronic music community, which I've been affiliated with and I care deeply about, a lot of my peer group has made these amazing careers, very prolific careers, out of recapitulating the same idea, many times in many different, a myriad of different permutations, and I actually get kind of envious of that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But at every point in my career, when I've developed something, I feel like fully, and it feels almost like public domain, I've then sort of released it to the world and carried on to the next thing, if that makes sense. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And I mean, since the mid 90s, you've sort of been known as the father of trance almost, and then you've sort of, certainly with this latest release, which we're just about to talk about, This Binary Universe, you've really sort of moved away from that. Yeah,
it's true, and it's all a part of my, I think, the evolution of, my personal evolution, just as a kind of human spinning on a ball of dirt in infinite space, mm-hmm. and a part of my musical evolution as well. Yeah, I mean, going back to the early 90s, when there wasn't a name for trance, or progressive house, when I first started making records, we didn't have that name at all, it didn't exist, and people didn't know what to call my music. And I remember the first article that I read describing what I did as trance.
And this was back in the days of EMA?
Yeah, it was, and that was in literally, 91, something like that, and so it's awesome to be associated with the beginning of something, I'm really proud of that, man, and trance has grown and evolved, and it's changed shapes and forms, and the tough thing is when something becomes sort of a boiled down version of something that had like a tremendous amount of integrity to start with, and there's still really good trance being made. I think somebody like Tiesto's making fantastic records. I'm a little biased because he's a dear friend too. Mm-hmm.
I have many of his albums.
Yeah, he's great, man. He really, you can tell when someone's really passionate about what they do, and he's extraordinarily passionate about what he does, and it has a very unique and specific sound, so anyway, but it's really excited to be involved in the sort of genesis, the first, thought in an idiom of music is really exciting, man. Mm-hmm. And insofar as this binary universe and what it is, and how that makes sense in like the lineage of things that I've been a part of, I think that this record more than anything reflects all of my interests, and that's kind of the first time I've ever allowed myself to do that, mm-hmm. so to speak, where I've said, okay, I want to take classical music, which you mentioned, I studied as a kid, I studied very, very in detail. And the only time I've actually gotten to actualize my love of classical music is when writing for an orchestra, for a film or whatever. And
I read that there's huge orchestral involvement on the Spinal Universe.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I've gotten to do that on films. You mentioned Fast and Furious. I got to work with an 80-piece orchestra on that, and on Stealth, an even bigger section, 110-piece orchestra. And I've been really lucky to be able to do that on films, but it's cost prohibitive on records. It's like those guys and girls are so expensive to work with, and so I really lucked out on this Binary Universe in that we'd gotten literally finished. We had 6 days to record the orchestra on Stealth, and we got done, and we were to the 6th day, and I'd recorded all the cues, and I'm standing at the podium the last day. We have 2 full 3-hour sessions left, and which in orchestral time is it's like dog years, you know what I mean? It's like, that's a long time. So I'm standing at the podium with a baton, and I realized we just recorded our last cue, and I said, well, I guess we're done. And my first chair violist, actually, she said to me, well, do you have anything else you want to record? We're all having a lot of fun. And I was like, okay, let's take our 15 now. And we took a break, and I printed charts for the Antikythera mechanism and some things for 1.618 and a couple other tracks for the record. And so I would have never been able to afford to do that on my own, because like I said, I mean, it can be literally up to $250,000 for a day to work with an orchestra. It's insanely expensive. So
you work a lot with hardware synthesizers, software synthesizers. You still prefer the original authentic orchestral element?
Absolutely, and definitely. I mean, there's some things that just can't be recapitulated. And I think everything has its place and its purpose. It's sort of like, soft synths as opposed to a hardware-based synthesizer.
Mm-hmm.
We're sitting in front of this really sort of esoteric, really small-run synth called a mono machine, and it's like, this thing can make some sounds you could never hope to make in a software synthesizer, but then software synthesizers can make sounds that you could never hope to make in that. It's the same thing with an orchestra. If you want the sound of an orchestra, like the real sound of it and dynamics of an orchestra, you have to use an orchestra. It's like, samples are wonderful and they're great, color, but it's a very different thing. I mean,
they miss the expression, perhaps.
They do, and also too, there's not to go too esoteric, but there's an energetic thing that happens when you have 110 people that have studied their instrument for 8 hours a day, sitting in a room moving air. It's a different thing. Okay. It's not this. It's 110 people with intention and integrity that have studied their instrument for, most of them for 20 years, 7 or 8 hours a day of practicing, literally a physical event of moving air,
Yeah.
And I mean, being in the room with that will make your hair stand on end. I will never forget the first time I got to conduct an orchestra. As a kid, as an 8-year-old, I got to do things like, conduct a quartet at the Washington Conservatory when I did Juilliard extension programs, and even at Berkeley, but the biggest section that I'd ever conducted before was maybe a 12-piece. Mm-hmm. And so to stand at first of all, you think like playing at Glastonbury for like 30,000 people is nerve-wracking? No, dude. Like, stand at a podium in front of 110 musicians that have studied their entire lives and know if you screw up. Like, you break a guitar string at Glastonbury or tank a mix, everybody's like, they're like, whatever, dude. And if it ends well, it ends well. With 110 musicians that have studied their whole life, it's nerve-wracking. The baton's shaking and stuff like that. But it's a very, very different thing to be in a room with those musicians and to hear that sort of sound it's absolutely overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It is so overwhelming.
One of the key aspects of the sound on the Spinal Universe is that you actually went and you mastered the entire thing in surround sound. And the experience when you first listen to that, when you're used to listening to stereo records, is this wave of sound just hits you from sort of all angles.
Yeah.
So how did that let you sort of expand your work creatively?
That's a great question. And honestly, Patty Jenkins said this better than I could ever say it. She's the director of Monster, and she said to me, what I like about how, we are using surround sort of the colloquial we when we're working on Monster is we're using it as another storytelling mechanism, and it's so true. It's such a powerful sort of voice in composition to. Okay, so there's the component to it where you're enveloping your listener in sound and all of that, but I feel like music in surround sound becomes much more like an event or a place than it does like this static kind of listening experience.
Right.
You know what I mean? If you shut your eyes, you're listening to surround sound, it's like you could be standing out in the desert or you could be in the woods.
It's an immersive kind of
experience. That's a good way to say it. It's very immersive, and it's not like, I don't know, with stereo music, and I love music, I've been listening to stereo music my whole life, but after, like, kind of the difference between the two is I feel like stereo music is like played at you, and surround music is sort of with you, It sounds kind of, I don't know.
So how do you think that this binary universe and presumably other follow-on works are going to translate into stereo? Is part of the experience lost?
Well, that's a really good question, honestly. And, there are things that I actually toned back on this record because I wanted it to translate to stereo, because that's how most of the listeners would be listening to it. I actually just heard about this amazing technology. I read about it in Popular Mechanics. They're starting to do convolution, like impulse responses of people's ear canals.
Right.
What this means is you'll be able to literally go to a telephone booth type thing, have your ears shot, so they do impulse responses of your ear canal, which is, if you think about it, we don't have 5 ears. You have 2 ears, so it's all phase shifting and
filtering and controlling the perception.
Exactly, psychoacoustic effects that tell our brain where sound is located in space, and it speaks to genetic memory and why we develop the ability to tell it where sound. So you wouldn't get eaten by a dinosaur, that kind of thing. So it's really interesting, like the psychoacoustic principles that go into effect when understanding about spatial location. Anyway, it's really exciting because they're actually going to start doing impulse responses of people's ear canals and then making plugs to go on your iPod headphones, so you can listen to something actually in surround sound on a stereo device. So the technology for all of this kind of stuff is coming, but it really was a thought for me, like how can I make it translate well because most people are going to listen to it in stereo. So, and it's a thought for me going forward into the future, because honestly I can't see myself going back and it feels like, making music in stereo now feels like I'm just kind of like, it's like listening to one side of a headphone. You're like, it's so boring to me after being able to throw stuff all around a room. It's anyway, spoiled.
Binary Universe, it's been called one of the first great works of the century. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept of the album and how it really differs from your last works?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And like I said, more than anything, this record speaks to all my interests, and all of them. One of the primary ones being classical music and classical music form, not just instrumentation. A lot of these pieces are written in thirds, like sort of like a sonata or concerto type form, where there's a statement of a theme, a variant of a theme, and a recapitulation of the theme. Some of them with more micro movements, some of them with 5 movements, but they really are following more classical forms than the pieces that I typically compose do, although I have applied some of that stuff to music I've written for a dance floor or for films. But this is the first time where I actually sat down and I said, I'm going to follow classical music, a sort of classical music form.
What I noticed personally was that running throughout the disc, there's really a sort of theme iterating through every single track, both in the audio and in the visuals, and it comes almost across like a wondrous story or tale being told, almost like
awesome,
a lullaby.
That's awesome, man. Thank you for saying that. And there's so much thought that's been put into it. So when you say something like that, it's really, it's actually like, it means a ton to me, because it would have been really easy to, not really easy, it would have been hard too, but it would have been easier to sort of make these compositions and then go, oh, let's just do some cool visual thing for it, and not sort of have a through line. But it's like everything down to the sound effects on the DVD, the way the menu items operate, to the cover art, to the actual pieces themselves, to the music, there's all this kind of, there's a counterpoint between all those pieces. They're all related. I mean, in the artwork, we're using, because there's a lot of coding on this record, and that's kind of the second thing I was getting to is my interest in computer music and in creating and designing software. I started a small software company 2 years ago called Sonic Architects, and we've been designing our first applications for release actually next year. Yeah. And all the beats were done on this record in Break Tweaker, my drum machine, which is the first surround sound drum machine. So there's that coding component, and that's actually reflected in the artwork. Like in the artwork, I'm kind of giving away something pretty big here, but in the artwork, there's a lot of there are things written in Morse code, and also too the Fibonacci sequence, which I reuse repeatedly in the music, is repeated throughout in the artwork. There's a picture of Kaya, of my daughter, on the last page, and it's divided up into the relationships, the 3 to 2 of the golden mean or the Fibonacci sequence, and so that means a lot to me. Saying that there's so much thought put into all of these things,
And you've actually, was it your R&R CD, which also featured a track called Fibonacci sequence?
That's right. Yeah, I've been sort of borderline obsessed with the Fibonacci sequence of the golden mean for years now. I find it so fascinating that there's something. There are many artists before me as well that have been. Bartok was very. He wrote a quartet that used every interval and every rhythm in it featured this relationship, and I think that artists, ones that are sort of geeky enough as I am to be, interested in mathematics. The funny thing being that all musicians are mathematicians, which is kind of ironic because us musicians think, we're bad at math, and it's like all you do is express mathematics all day. That's what we do as musicians, So we're sort of intuitively good at math. But anyway, many of the artists that are drawn to this relationship, I think that the sort of fascination with it and what's so beautiful about it is it's a relationship that is expressed all through nature, from the symmetry in our bodies, the relationship of our forearm to our arm, our eyes to our head, the relationship of the spiral of the Milky Way being an expression of the Fibonacci sequence, or a fern that unfurls. It's literally everywhere, and we could go off at the deep end into some sort of esoteric, spiritual, philosophical thing really easily, but I find it to be something so beautiful that it's not something that all humans are drawn to aesthetically, and in terms of sound, in terms of visually, it's expressed everywhere. I think it's so beautiful, and so.
And this was a core component behind some of the visuals on the album.
Absolutely.
Track 1.618.
Yeah, absolutely. Being the golden mean. Yeah, and there's a lot of things to discover in that piece of music. And I had a couple years ago, I had a kid come up to me at Berkeley, and he said, in our harmony and theory class, we've been doing a harmonic analysis of the bass line from the hip hop phenomenon, and I was like, that is the coolest shit I've ever heard in my life. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
Okay. It's on the internet, we're allowed.
Okay, all right. So I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard in my whole life. And I thought, like, how neat it would be for a kid like that to be digging around in some of these tracks. Because honestly, there's some things in them, like authors do, where they're doing a play on their favorite authors. In this case, I'm doing a play on some of my favorite mathematic relationships. And there's things in this record. I mean, if you think there's a through line between all the pieces, there's actually internally in the music only things that can be understood by looking at the waveforms. And that I can't wait in 5 years for a student to come up to me and go, I discovered the fractal relationship in the internal locus, or I discovered these kind of things that are sort of hidden from most people, you know what I mean? But also, too, I think the expression of them, orally, is beautiful. So, it's fun for me to do, and I think expresses itself well sonically, but cool to hide too. You know what I mean? There's a lot of like Easter eggs, I guess you would call them.
So related to mathematics, let's talk about the production of track 1 on the disc now, that was written in C sound.
That's right. It was written completely in C sound. So much fun. When I did a screening in Boston, we did a theater tour, and we actually showed This Binary Universe in theaters, and it was amazing. And it was incredible because it's not a narrative. It's not a normal narrative film, and to see like packed seats in a movie theater, people sitting eating popcorn was pretty awesome, man. But in Boston, I got to tell all kinds of C-sound jokes that only the audience would, understand, because it was like a bunch of music students. But
could you maybe describe what C-sound is?
Yeah, absolutely. C-sound is a language developed by Barry Vercoe and also too by Dr. Richard Boulanger, who's one of my mentors who taught me at Berkeley. It's an amazing language for the creation of both sound instruments and, if you're daring enough, to actually try to compose in. It's very daunting for 50th time users because it's all text oriented. So there's no visual objects, and there's certainly no keyboard or something like that. It's you design instruments from scratch, maybe what I could do is I could give you some code and you guys could post on the page and people could look at it.
Well, what was interesting, and I was going to mention, is that I happened to be reading through your blog yesterday.
And I noticed I posted.
You posted a code snippet there. So there's a rumor that you might be releasing some more of this. Can we expect to see that?
Actually, yeah. I want to release the entire thing. The thing about it that's sort of embarrassing is I need to comment it, and so people that are programmers will read it and they'll be like, well, what the hell does this block of code mean? You know what I mean? So I really need to go through and comment it properly, and then I am going to post the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But it's been so cool since I posted that blog to have 19-year-old girls come up to me and be like, yeah, dude, I downloaded C-Sound and I compiled your orchestra and your score. And I'm like, what? It's so rad. They're like, it's so cool. It's got the main line from All That Makes Us Human continues, and I don't know. I like that. I feel really lucky that people that express an interest in what I do often are content creators of some sort themselves. They're artists. There's a tremendous amount of support from communities like DeviantArt and my sort of fan base, as it were, like on something like MySpace. It's like 90% of the people I feel like that have supported my work. Some newer, some for years, are people that paint or draw or write poetry or make music, and either for fun or a lot professionally. So it's so cool because I feel like I can do these things that are kind of heady and intellectual, hopefully not in a wanky way, but that are really genuine, and that people are interested in that. You know what I mean? I don't know, it feels good. I feel like I've found my people, kind of thing. Does it make sense?
It does. And just sticking on that concept of the technology used on the disc, I also hear that you'll be releasing, along with Break Tweaker, Stutter Edit.
That's right.
In 2007.
Yeah, that's right.
This is one of the techniques that you've used on various vocals and that you're very famous for.
Yeah.
One of the questions I had around that was, when you release Stutter Edit, is there a fear that, like with trance, suddenly everybody will be doing it and it's something that you'll have to move away from?
There's not a fear, it's a certainty. It's a certainty. I mean, but I had one of it's a kind of like Pandora's box. It's like I spent years and years and years developing this technique, and there have been tons of addendums to it as well. Like, this plugin does things I could never do by hand, like exponentially and logarithmically splining note values where you're increasing or decreasing the spacing between these micronote rhythms. I mean, I can do them by hand. I've had to do them by hand, but it's like literally have to sit down and do equations. It's a huge pain. But I mean, I had one of the programmers for Linkin Park on that, and I can't tell you how many phone calls like this I actually haven't gotten, but people that have worked for me or that know me or know my work have gotten, where they call and they say, can you tell us how you do that? We want to, and I'm like, well, sure, if you want to come over, I'll show you some stuff. And then, they didn't show up, but they try to rip it off, but poorly, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, I'd rather give people a tool so they could do it right than hear like a kind of crappy approximation of it, you know, and not slating Linkin Park like I like their stuff. Not.
And this is something that interests me as sort of an amateur musical doodler. Will that be available in VST form, or is this strictly going to be around Mac? Because I heard you're a big Logic fan.
It is actually going to be around the Mac, and for one reason and one reason only. And this may be unpopular with certain communities, is because unlike my music, which, you know, now music is public domain when you release music. Unlike my music, this is 15 years of thought has been put into this. And, you know, I mean, I have lots of PCs. I love the PC. Nobody pays for software on the PC. Mm-hmm. And so more than anything, it's going to be that all this work is copy protected and dongle protected even more specifically. And I know you really hated to hear that. Yeah, it's gonna be Mac only for right now, at least. You know.
So I have a related question from some of our readers on the internet.
Okay.
A lot of followers of the dance and trance genres have, over the last decade or so, become very familiar with the sort of peer-to-peer tools, and that's sort of an access channel to a lot of music, mm-hmm. a lot of rare, perhaps, dance music that people don't generally have access to.
Right, it's very true.
Maybe it's because it's been released on vinyl or it's not available in certain countries. It happens a lot. So the question is, how do you feel about people who do download music, your music, for example, for free?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I have really conflicted feelings about it, honestly, because just to be very simple about it, I download music. So I'll explain to you from a personal vantage point how I treat this activity. People that make music, you know, and that are really devoted to making music, especially, it's different than, it's so funny because, you know, when downloading became this first huge popular topic of discussion, we're talking about Metallica, you know, and
back in the Napster days.
Yeah, and you know, Metallica being a group that sells tens of millions of records, and you know, people that, and not like I don't like Metallica, I think they make good music, but they're literally like rolling in money, you know what I mean? Someone, you know, like myself that, you know, runs a small company and I have a lot of mouths to feed and, you know, have literally been spending the back end money from my DJ gigs to pay to make my own records and to start the software company. That kind of thing actually literally on paper damages my ability to keep making music. Mm-hmm. So, and
a lot of the way that people justify this to themselves is that maybe they weren't going to buy the record anyway, or it doesn't really hurt the artist because there's this notion that every artist is rolling in money.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're totally right. But it literally does, like, if you look at it on paper, it affects my ability to keep making music. And that's just being totally honest. And so the way that I try to approach this subject is I download music all the time. I download music from P2P services. I use them all, right? I also buy music from iTunes. If I download something and I like it, I pay for it. It's that simple. And it's kind of something, a rule that I live by because I think that it shows a respect for the artist and it shows a respect for what the artist is doing. And I also know how this affects certain artists. I have so many friends. I've been lucky because, you know, I have film scoring stuff to retreat into, which is, you know, an area where I can go and work on and I can do DJ gigs and I can generate some kind of income, even though I have such a large overhead and so many people to take care of. You know, I'm able to not sink by doing those things, but I'm making records. I've never made money. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a weird thing actually for people to hear. I've never made money for making a record. You know, it sucks not to be able to tell your mom you got a gold record too, because you do have a gold record, but it's in downloads, you know what I mean?
And do you think the problem's really, okay, everybody's using these peer-to-peer systems for the purposes mainly of discovery. Is the problem that there's not then a mechanism to go and actually buy that music easily over the internet?
Possibly. I mean, that's a part of it, yeah. I'm not saying the onus falls just on the people that are doing it, and I'm also not saying that it's wrong. I don't think, I mean, taking sort of a Buddhist approach to it, it's like, it's not wrong unless you think it's wrong. For me, to I know what it's like to sit here behind the computer for 20 hours a day for 8 months straight to work on the beginning of a record. And I have friends that I watched toil away and that their music is so altruistic and they have such a small audience. Literally artists that would sell 2,000 units of vinyl and that's what they were surviving on are gone now.
Yeah.
They're gone, and they're gone because people download their tracks and don't pay for them. And then take those tracks and play them out. I just think that shows a tremendous amount of disrespect, honestly. Now, I can understand using, like I said, it's like I use it, what you're talking about, to discover music is awesome. I found so many things like that, but then I'm the guy that will either reach out to the artist and say, hey man, why don't you come remix a track of mine? I'll go to the store and I'll buy their record and I'll talk about them in interviews. I just think that, it's a shame for people to not support things they love. And that's just kind of the best way that I can say it. It's an awesome tool for finding out about stuff. But, there's a lot of people, very successful DJs that it's almost like cannibalism, you know what I mean? Where they use these services and then are literally playing the tracks out and, doing well from playing those tracks out. And it's like, guys, come on. There's a million ways to legitimately buy great music. And it's sort of esoteric too. Like Beatport is amazing.
Beatport's good.
For dance music, you can find just about anything on there. And iTunes is terrific. And kind of the holes that you have in iTunes, I find stuff on Beatport. But there is.
I've been using eMusic a lot as well.
That's great too, man. And I've been recently checking out the MP3.com thing too. And there's great stuff there as well. That's a cool model too, because you can leave your things in a place and then plug into it from different devices.
Yeah.
But I just think it's about showing, artists respect for the integrity and altruism and time that they put into.
Because I think music's something that the reason that we like to listen to so much of it is because it's something that it feels like a part of us. It affects us all emotionally. So obviously there's an intrinsic value there. People should contribute.
Definitely, man. And I'm more than anything, just as a fan of music, I don't want to see my favorite little labels go away.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's why I'm out there. Like, man, if I can give you guys $20 and I have it to give you, I'm totally going to give it to you because I believe in what you guys are doing. And I want to hear the next, They Will Know Us by Trail of Dead record. I want to hear the next Trent Mahler album. I want to hear, Sasha's next record, And even my friends, man, swear to God, in fact, even more so, my friends. The first thing I do on a Tuesday when somebody's record comes out is I go to the store and I buy 5 copies and I send it to, my friends. You know what I mean? That are anyway.
So on the topic of supporting artists and in fact supporting you, tell us about how some of the artwork for the Binary Universe came together on DVD.
It's an amazing experience, honestly, how all of this came together and as we've been talking about, and people may know, I've been working on films for years now, and it's something I love doing, and I love composing music to something that already exists, and that's what film composition is. It's like you watch an image, and you go, sit at a spotting session with the director, and you say, okay, how is our audience supposed to feel now, and how are we going to relate the characters thematically, and all this stuff, and it's amazing the amount of psychology that goes into film composition. I love it. And my mom's a psychologist too, so I actually really dig that part of film. Music can actually be extraordinarily manipulative, and sometimes in a bad way, but usually in a way that's so powerful that without it, people, if you watch a movie naked, as we would call it, it's incredible how much less impact it has, Anyway, I love doing it. It's a wonderful thing to participate in, and in doing this Binary Universe, I wanted to do something kind of the opposite direction, in a way that was sort of self-empowering and to empower the people that I brought in as teammates, as it were, on the 7 different pieces, to say, hey, you guys do whatever you want, and then the music's done instead of the other way around, which is how it typically is, and. I approached artists that I knew or whose work I loved, and I so wish I had found DeviantArt before I started this binary universe,
Uh-huh.
because my job would have been a bazillion times easier. Because the quality of art on there is astonishing.
Yeah, it's superb.
It's ridiculous, man. I found these amazing artists. It was just a lot harder to do, many of whom are actually on DeviantArt, which pisses me off. I wish I'd found that earlier. But, I found these incredible groups of people like Jeff Nentrup and Gabe, his animator, Scott Pagano that did 1.618 the Antikythera Mechanism,
Yeah.
Mondi that did All That Makes Us Human Continues, Adam Doyle that did the Internal Locus, and just the incredible artists. And so it was really reverse engineered. I finished the compositions, and these guys, these guys did these beautiful pieces. Just kind of going back to what we were talking about a second ago too, not to be too heavy, but just to give a for example of it, to make this record, I did this record without a record label, so I financed the entire record myself. I paid the animators myself, and I literally took my DJing money over the course of a year to make the record, and then to take it and to show it in theaters, I sold my car. That's what it takes sometimes if you believe in something. But I deeply believe in this, and I want to be able to do more of it. And
you must have 80 minutes of animated graphic footage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And everybody did huge bro deals with me too. It's like, people really came to the table, and people deeply cared about this music and this project in the same way that I did. It would never exist were it not for that,
Yeah.
So
and there's a huge variety of artwork on the label. There's computer animation, there's watercolor imagery.
Yeah.
There's real life footage out in the deserts with some really beautiful stuff, and it's all tied amazingly well to the music. Everything's synced. There's various storylines running through. And was it hard task actually sort of communicating the ideas on the album to the people actually doing the art, or was it something that they listened and they picked up?
It's a good question, and it was some of both. Not hard, but there were, basically the way that it started, kind of the initial sort of cathartic outpouring of what is this visual piece going to look like, and us sitting down, and myself and the teams of artists sitting down and storyboarding this stuff. I just found that everybody had interesting ideas to start with, and so I didn't want to hamper that. I wanted to say okay, cool, how does this piece of music make you feel? And I'd already written kind of my own sort of little treatment about what all this is about and what it means to me and all the rest of it. And then you would find these incredible points of connection between what an artist would intuitively feel from a piece of music and what it meant to me. And so what we really emphasized on were those points of connection, and then we storyboarded the pieces, and then I really let them go, man. These artists, every single one of them is just amazingly gifted, and I really wanted to give them the room, because I know it's hard when I'm scoring a film. It's so hard when you have 15 people breathing over your shoulder and are it needs to feel more blue, and you're like, oh my god, dude, what are you talking about? So I didn't want to be that guy. So once we had the initial idea, I said, go to town, and then send me some drafts when you start getting there. And so people were so excited to show their first drafts, and then we went through a couple permutations of edits, and we all ended up in places that everybody was extremely happy with. So it was just a big love fest, honestly, and it couldn't have gone better, that part of it.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
There's one track in particular on the album that I wanted to sort of talk to you about, which after we played the disc in our office, a lot of people felt very moved by Good Morning Kaya, which is the last track on the disc, and that's sort of focused around the wonderment of being a father and your daughter Kaya. Can you tell us a little bit about what sort of inspired you to take that and publish it in such a sort of visual form? It's very open.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you phrased that question. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. Honestly, so much of this record has to do with the experience of being a new father, down to the sort of dynamic of the album. Somebody asked me a question about this at an Apple thing at the Remix Hotel last week, we were talking about it, and it really crystallized some thoughts for me about it. Right down to the fact that a lot of this music is more down tempo because literally, Kaya slept on my lap while I wrote most of this record, you hear all the time, how profound the experience of becoming a parent is and how life-changing it is. You hear all of that, and it's all true, and they're all truisms. And then when you experience it experientially, it's like some sort of how you would hear about ecstatic religious experiences. It's so powerful that there's really not a way to describe it until it happens to you. And so that piece, and particularly too for me, without going, being too ridiculously overly personal, but my experience growing up was so dissimilar to the experience that I'm able to provide for my daughter, and so the event of parenting is something so significant to me and so powerful because I'm getting to give things that I didn't get, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it was important to me to say something with a lot of integrity that spoke to how powerful an experience it is for me, because it would be like they say in psychology, not talking about the elephant in the room. It's like it's a life-changing experience for me, and a very empowering one too. In the same way as like, I've been lucky that I had some good teachers in school and stuff, but I didn't ever have someone that said, hey, this is what happens when you want to make a career in music, and here's how you do this, and I'll help with this. And I just kind of crawled my way up this, sort of broken glass thing, mountain, and discovered all of it, sort of on my own. And so something incredibly empowering for me is to get to mentor to people that are coming up. I have there are 3 people that are in Berkeley right now that I've spoken with for close to 10 years, man. That I check their work, and I see how they're doing. I talk to their teachers, and in the same way as I get something so profound out of that, it's like that on to an exponential power getting to parent, Kaya. So this guy asked me, he was like, how can you be so honest? He's like, aren't you scared of being so honest? And I just said,
this is what actually surprised me about the track when I first saw it as well. That it's so dedicated and honest and out there. And usually when you buy almost any album, there's attributes on the CD sleeve, but you've actually taken the next step. You've dedicated an entire section of the album.
Yeah. Well, it's just. He was asking this question, and I was just saying, like, if I just, it's kind of my calling to, in a way, to put it out there, and it's in a very, very honest way. Mm-hmm. Not just this piece, but I've been called to do things like that in different forms. My whole career, where people have said, oh my God, you can't do that, man. You're known for this, or you're known for that, or, that's going to freak people out in this way. And I've just had this overwhelming intuitive sense that it was the right thing to do. And man, I'll tell you something else too, realizing how many people in my audience too, people that care about what I do are young parents, and how it's affected them, and it's ridiculous how empowering it is. I can't even explain. I have to say this too. I can think off the top of my head of 4 or 5 people that surround me in a business capacity that not only discouraged me from putting that on the record, but said you can't put that on there, and I just, it feels really empowering and vindicating in a way to realize that telling the truth and being honest and being open emotionally with people is like for me personally as an artist is the right thing to do. So.
I mean, I have to say that just as a person, that made me feel actually proud as a human being that you actually put that track on the record.
Thank you, man. That means a lot to me.
So, okay, let's talk a little about your live performances, which you're also very well known for. You're taking Binary Universe on tour right now.
Yeah. I can't wait.
What's the reaction been to that after you sort of changed pace from your previous material?
It's been amazing, honestly. I mean, amazing. It's a different thing to watch this as a show. It's a different thing than watching me play dance music or, sort of, breakbeat stuff with big punk rock guitar riffs. It's a very different aesthetic, and it's amazing to watch people engage in the material. I think it's just as exciting to watch. It's just a different pacing and tempo. There's different things to focus on. Obviously, there's this insane visual counterpart to it, which is, I mean, when we start the tour properly and we're doing it, the visuals live, it's going to be ridiculous, seriously.
And that's happening at the end of this month throughout December.
That's right, yeah.
That's across America and in Mexico.
That's right, yeah. First run of the tour starts November 27th to December 23rd, and we're playing all over the places. Myself and Thomas Dolby, we're doing a double headline, which is crazy. He's like one of my heroes. It's ridiculous. And performing it in surround sound, which on its own is unprecedented for me. And I don't know that anybody, I keep wanting to say we're the first people that have dragged around a surround sound system, at least for this kind of music. I know that Floyd did it a long time ago for a period of time. I think they did some quadraphonic stuff. Anyway, I'm ridiculously excited about taking this out, performing it, and people are so receptive to it. There are going to be some parts that are not dance floor moments, but that are a bit heavier, when we perform it live. But we're using all of these, literally right now, two of the guys that work here, Choi and Brian, are downstairs working on the Stutter Edit plugin as we speak. Choi might actually be in the kitchen right now. And that's where we have our software meetings, is at the kitchen table, for real.
Sounds a lot like that.
Yeah, cool. So, we're going to be using all this proprietary software, the Stutter Edit plugin. I'm going to be able to granulate things in surround sound live. It's going to be crazy, man. And I think, that with the visuals, it's going to be really exciting.
So, have you ever had any, with all this technology that you sort of rely on when you're performing live now, have you ever had any scary moments where something didn't work or something crashed mid-performance?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. I always make jokes about the drunk promoter's girlfriend. Those are my favorite jokes to make. You have like the promoter wants to come up and say hi. It's funny when you're DJing, or whatever you want to call what I don't consider what I do when I'm performing with a laptop DJing, because it's more like live remixing or whatever. I'm using bits and pieces of little tracks and writing stuff on the fly. But anyway, doing that thing, for some reason, or even if you're using vinyl, people think you're not doing anything. And so they think, like, this is a great time to talk to this guy. Like, let's have, like, a serious, like, in-depth, heart-to-heart, And so you have, like, 5 people in the booth, like, dude, what's up? That one track you did in 93. And then the promoter's girlfriend kicks the power supply out of the wall, like, to your audio interface, and there's, like, 10,000 people out there, and you're like, oh, my God, you guys, please get out of the booth. It's nothing personal. We can hang out afterwards, you know what I mean? But, yeah, I've had many of those moments, and it's sort of it's that line that you have to ride if, you want to be out doing something that's kind of on the edge, you know what I mean? And it can be really scary, man, honestly. And I've sort of had to make a policy of like, okay, I'll hang with all you guys, we'll sign whatever, but just after, okay? Because that kind of stuff can happen. But fortunately, when you're holding a guitar or, have synths around you, people actually think you're doing something. So they don't can you imagine that though? Like someone coming up on stage at a show and being like, hey dude, what's up? So yeah, you're like, can I talk to you in a minute? I'm like right in the middle of something, you know what I mean? But anyway, so yeah, I've had many harrowing stories, drinks flying on the laptop, all of it, man. And but you just, it's fun. It keeps it on the edge, like playing with a band, because then you're like constantly, you're checked into the experience. I found that spinning vinyl can become very, and I only did that for a short period of time, maybe even less than a year, but that can become very sort of autonomic, like your heartbeat. It's like you're just doing it. You know what I mean? You go like there, and you're like, okay, I got my next mix, and there, and then you can have a conversation. You know what I mean? This is not like that. Performing with a laptop and certainly performing live is completely different to that. So
one of the interesting aspects of this tour is that you are doing quite a number of smaller venues, which are intended to be sort of more involved with the audience.
I'm so excited about that, man.
And then you're going to be playing circuit bent instruments.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I have some amazing instruments that both I've built and some amazing builders have built for me as well too. So
could you describe circuit bending briefly?
Yeah, sure. Circuit bending basically is it's taking anything with exposed IC chips. So it could be a speak and spell or a cheap keyboard from Target or a kid's toy. I've taken many of Kai's toys. It's funny. There's a friend of mine named Tim Kaiser, and he built into the body of my tricello the electronics and stuff, which is a circuit bent kid's megaphone. He's a dad too, and he was saying around his house the way that it works is if it drops, it's his. So sometimes like his kids will have like a cool, pretty new toy, and he's like, it's like look, it's broken. It's coming to my workbench.
Like your Wii and your PlayStation 3 people.
Yeah, exactly, dude. No, but it's so much fun because basically, I mean, one of the things I love in classical music or in modern orchestral music is this idea of what we call aleatoricism, which is introducing randomization in the compositions. So somebody like Penderecki, who's considered one of the godfathers of that particular movement of modern orchestral music, that idea of a bunch of players being able to grab a random note or play a random rhythm, you can't really do that with electronics. Electronic music is much more deterministic, and
it's sort of bringing back the fluidity of jazz, but with sort of electronic instrument.
That's a great way of saying it, man. And some of the people that are heroes of mine that I love listening to talk, like John Cage or Brian Eno, they're very, very interested and have experimented with for years in this idea of music that determines its own outcome. So the only way that we really have access to making non-deterministic music or more aleatoric music, if you will, is actually using these circuit bent instruments, which are completely random.
Yeah. And do these feature on many of your albums?
Actually, this is the first time I've used them, but I'm using them a lot on my next record. My next record, by the way, too, I can say to people who are waiting for me to make another record of dance music, is crammed with dance music. That's all it is. So,
and is it sort of a mix of styles similar to the last ones, or have you taken sort of the progressive theme of Binary Universe and sort of applied that more?
I definitely have. I decided before I began this Binary Universe that I want to make records that Emotional Technology for me really hit the peak of, okay, look at all these different styles of music I can make. It's like, okay, Brian, calm your ass down, okay? And let's make something that makes sense as a body, right? Mm-hmm. And so not like I'm not proud of Emotional Technology, I am, and there's some, but that actually is, that actually is 2 records, honestly, and if I had allowed myself to make that 2 records, I think it would have been a much more complete body of work. And someday, when I box set all my stuff up after 15 records, I'm going to do that. Because songs like Dark Heart Dawning and Animals and The Only Constant Is Change, that is actually a whole album of this more like acoustic stuff. Yeah. And then things like Knowledge of Self, and Somnambulist and all of those tracks, that's a complete thought too. So anyway, I decided before making this Binary Universe and before starting on my next album as well, I wanted to make records that have more of a through line throughout the entire course of the record. And this is sort of more harking back to things like EMA, my first album. And even if ESCM to an extent became more growing in a bunch of different directions. So my next record really is like there's sort of a convergent sound that unifies that whole record, you know, and it is all music for dance floor. So, and then at some point I'll make a record that's like This Binary Universe, but sort of more acoustic, but kind of glitchy, but with vocals as well. I mean, it's something there's 50 things on the project boards, you know, that I just keep ticking them off, man. You know what I mean? So one at a time, you know.
So when can we pre-order?
Hopefully soon, man. Yeah, hopefully soon. I think that I'm going to be getting done with it in the spring, and so hopefully I'll have it out by next summer. That's what I'm hoping.
Any title? Yeah.
Kind of, but not. Titles are, for those of you that don't know this or don't know my work, if you go and look at the titles of my work, there's some crazy titles, but all of which have a tremendous amount of like personal significance and meaning to me. So the titles aren't like icing on the cake. That's like the stamp that it forever lives by. So there's a couple working titles, but not one I'm going to announce yet because I'm not certain which one it's going to be.
Okay.
So.
Excellent. Okay, well, can we get a preview of Stutter Edit?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Might have to like, you know, like sort of like they do on hard copy or whatever, like black out parts of it so people don't know what it does yet. But yeah, I'll show you it, man. We're working on it downstairs.
Okay, so we'll run downstairs and take a peek at that. And in the meantime, buy the records. Don't pirate the records. Thanks very much for...
You got it, man. It's a pleasure. It was nice talking, man.
Awesome.
No screen. You can film hands.
Okay. So... That is sick.
Enough!
So what you've just been listening to is a little sneak peek, I believe the first sneak peek of Stutter Edit.
Yeah.
This is, what's your company going to be called?
Sonic Architects.
Sonic Architects. There's actually a page on the internet right now that you can go to which has nothing but a holding screen.
That's right. You got it. Yeah, we've been working really hard on our website. A part of the website is we want to have, you know, we want it to be a store as well too. So that's like we're integrating a store engine and this whole kind of thing into it. But yeah, it's looking like we're gonna probably have 4 or 5 apps that are gonna come out over the next year. So really exciting.
That is wicked.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Sweet, man.
All right.